Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining us on today's webinar. Just waiting to get Teresa and Jenny on camera and on mic. Hey Teresa, how's it going?
Hello, hi.
Hey Jenny.
Hello.
Thanks. Thanks so much everyone for joining us today for our webinar on onboarding process for e-commerce clients, the key to improving client retention and satisfaction. My name is Jeffrey Golano. I'm your host for today's webinar. I'm the head of marketing here at 82X, and I'm joined by two experts in e-commerce accounting and bookkeeping, Teresa Slack as well as Jenny Moore. So thanks so much for joining us today.
Glad to be here. Thanks.
Yes,
So,
thank you.
Before we get started, probably helpful to provide some brief introductions around who we are and how we got into the wonderful world of e-commerce accounting. I'll just do a quick brief introduction of myself. So as mentioned previously, my name is Jeff. I was once the head of marketing for a company called HubDoc, which was an amazing experience working really closely with Jamie McDonald and Jamie Schulman. And then eventually had a stint at Xero and then started within a different type of startup in the construction tech space. But then some way, somehow found my way back to working with Jamie McDonald, Jamie Schulman, and you wonderful people here in the accounting and bookkeeping community that I definitely missed. Jenny and Teresa, I'll probably start with you. Love for you to introduce yourself, but also would be great to get an understanding of what brought you into the world of e-commerce accounting and bookkeeping.
Sure. Thanks, Jeff. For those of you that don't know me, I am Teresa, and I'm one of the two founders of Financially Bookkeeping Solutions. We are the Canadian leaders in e-commerce bookkeeping for Shopify and Amazon and beyond. And 8 years ago, my sister, Connie Smith, and I decided to go out on our own and build Financially. But at that same time, my daughter got a job at Shopify as a graphic designer. So of course, started learning about Shopify, got super excited about it. I actually created a store for myself to sell my artwork that you see behind me, and just fell in love with it. And then because I own a bookkeeping firm, it was like, all right, well, now how do we get all of that information from that Shopify store into the books? And our niche was born, and we fell in love with it, and we became the experts in Shopify. And then I had one of my accounting colleagues reach out and say, I know you guys do Shopify, but what about Amazon? And we went, sure, let's learn Amazon. And now that really is our specialty. But of course, our clients come to us with lots of other gateways and lots of other systems that we've had to learn as well. I think the reason I love it so much is it is complex and you never get bored. And every one of them is just a little bit different. I absolutely love this niche.
And with complexity comes opportunity, which we'll talk a little bit more in the rest of the presentation. Jenny, would love a quick intro from yourself.
Yeah, sure. So hello, everyone. My name is Jenny Moore. I wear two hats, three if you're considering the family and the kids. So I have more details, which is our practice still running strong after 16 years today. And I really was looking for that next step in my career, and I found that with Ignition. Ignition is a product I've used since 2016. It's been great to keep us in scope, especially with these e-commerce clients. And to answer your question specifically, Jeff, what brought us into e-commerce with more details? Well, I'd say it's client-driven. That was really it. It was like, hey, Jenny, we know you can handle all this great stuff. Or we were getting referrals about how we were able to solve other problems. And they're like, well, let's throw her another curveball and see if she can handle this. So stumbled into it would be the professional answer.
And we'll get into a few data points that I think back up that type of scenario for many accounting and bookkeeping practices, likely for many that are actually joining us on today's webinar. So let's get into it. We have a ton of content to get through. Let's talk a little bit about the agenda today, what we're going to be talking about. So first and foremost, we're going to be talking about the how and the why behind documented onboarding processes and how they help improve the e-commerce client experience. We'll then do a deep dive into an onboarding checklist with Teresa and Jenny. Teresa has been so wonderful in actually working with A2X and Ignition on bringing to life their actual onboarding checklist. So in addition to this webinar, you'll get access to a wonderful resource that actually walks you through step by step the steps that you should take to successfully onboard your clients. And we're going to spend a large part of this actual webinar going through that checklist, how to use it, how to extract value from it, and how to customize it for your own practice and clients. And then lastly, we'll talk about best practices when implementing an onboarding process. These best practices can be applied really to any process that you're going to be implementing within your practice. And then last but not least, Q&A with the pros. So Jenny and Teresa here to answer all of your questions. And to that end, it would be amazing if you ask your questions throughout the webinar in the Q&A section on Zoom. You'll see that in kind of the black bar with all of the menu options. We'll try, if the questions are relevant to the topics that we're discussing in the moment, and if we're lucky and we get to it, we'll try to answer them along the way. But if not, we'll do our best to answer every single question that we can at the end of the webinar. Great. And then the last piece, I always forget to say this, but it's always asked, this webinar will be recorded and we will send it as a follow-up email. So look out for that in your inbox. We're also going to share all of the awesome resources to your email post-webinar. I went ahead and sent out the actual checklist, PDF and customizable Google Sheet before the webinar. So you should have that in your inbox. So feel free to follow along and ask questions about it as we move forward. But if not, don't worry, it's gonna all come to you in a follow-up email. So let's get into it. Okay, so Jenny made a point that her door or window into e-commerce bookkeeping was client-driven. And we're seeing that more and more from accounting and bookkeeping practices, in North America specifically, but also around the world. E-commerce bookkeeping is likely going to be the fastest growing niche for many practices here today, but accounting and bookkeeping practices generally. And the reason for that is it's estimated that by 2024, about $5.5 trillion are going to be recorded in e-commerce sales, representing 22% of all retail sales. So one of the fastest growing categories across every industry in the world, especially when it comes to consumer purchases. We're going through a little bit of an e-commerce bump in the road right now. And Teresa, you can actually speak to this a little bit in terms of the growth that Shopify and Amazon had experienced during the pandemic. I'll let you touch on that.
Yeah, sure. I was looking at some statistics recently, and we have seen a consistent growth in e-commerce, over the last many years. But when the pandemic hit and the world went into lockdown, everybody was forced to change. They had to pivot. I know it was the word of the pandemic, and they had to take their businesses online. And e-commerce experienced 10 years of growth in 90 days during the pandemic. Just imagine that. So there's no wonder that so many accounting professionals are now, through no choice of their own, getting dragged into e-commerce, because we need accounting professionals who can support these growing businesses.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then I think kind of just, a qualitative test, if we ask ourselves here today, in 2 years from now, 3 years from now, do we believe that more people are going to be purchasing online or less people? I think we could all unequivocally say more, likely a lot more. So this is the category that's going to continue to grow, whether we go back to a steady state post-pandemic or not, which is
absolutely. Yeah, once they've learned how to do online, they're not going to stop. Even from the purchaser's perspective, it's like maybe they never ever bought something online before, but they had to during the pandemic, and they learned just how easy it is. They're not going to stop doing that.
Totally agree. So fastest growing niche, because obviously an incredibly fast growing category industry, but also this is an industry in particular that extracts a ton of value from getting accurate e-commerce bookkeeping. Accurate e-commerce bookkeeping in this context provides confidence and compliance, helps these businesses pay less in tax, helps them become more profitable, more attractive to buyers. And this is something that's incredibly relevant in the space with the onset of aggregators who are coming in and rolling up businesses. It introduces less risk. And then last but not least, better performance visibility. I know that a lot of these apply to, generally speaking, every business, but in particular, I think there's a ton of value in this for e-commerce because, to your earlier point, Teresa, there's a ton of complexity associated with e-commerce as well. I'm gonna pause here because this is kind of the services that you sell to small businesses every single day. Anything that you might want to add here?
Yeah, I think that because of the complexity of e-commerce accounting, the actual work of doing it can be harder. And it is so key that a business owner has accurate financial information because they can make big mistakes without it. I had a client who came to us with his e-com business. Of course, no bookkeeping had been done. We created a set of financials for him. We did about 1.5 years worth of bookkeeping for him. He thought he was doing well. When we finished the books, we found out he was not. But because of the detailed information that we could give him around sales, around his shipping costs and his gross profit, he was able to immediately go and make some adjustments to how he was managing his shipping, managing his warehousing and his advertising. And within 60 days, we had him turned around profitable. But without that detailed information, he wouldn't have known that. He would have continued to just go on the amount of money that was going in his bank and hope for the best.
Yeah, and I love how that takes the conversation out of compliance only. It's really about providing that visibility to make informed decisions. You had also mentioned a story yesterday when we were chatting about a client in which you helped him readjust his retail pricing.
Yeah.
His margins were too thin.
Yes.
And looked like a successful business, ended up being not as successful as everyone anticipated. And the only way that they saw the truth was through accurate e-commerce bookkeeping.
Yeah, exactly. And it was scary for him. He thought he was doing fine, realizing that, oh, wait a minute, his margins were so thin, he actually was not. And he was able to change his pricing, change his strategy, and turn it around. Rather than at the end of the year, everything's done. You can't fix what's happened in the past. You know, with timely financial information, they can make adjustments along the way.
So that's a really good segue. You had talked about kind of like complexity, and it's really hard to get this information and this data, which is why accountants and bookkeepers are even more valuable for this particular industry segment. So I'm just going to jump into the next slide. E-commerce bookkeeping is complex and increases in complexity the more you sell. Now, those are kind of like big words, complex, right? But like, what does that actually mean in practice? And we're going to focus on a few areas of complexity, honing in really on one here, which is kind of one of the big problems with e-commerce bookkeeping is that you now have all of these sellers who are selling to multiple audiences across different channels. You had mentioned Amazon, you had mentioned Shopify, BigCommerce, WooCommerce, right? The list goes on and on. But unfortunately, the data that they're getting from these platforms into the general ledger, whether Xero or QuickBooks Online, it just isn't what they need to actually have visibility into what's going on into the business. So Teresa, would love for you to dive in a little bit more into the actual problem and the complexity that people are seeing within this specific space.
Absolutely. So there's a few areas that we talk about. We are going to focus a little bit more on this one that's on the screen, but I just want to mention sales tax is a major complexity for e-commerce because they're selling across the country, they're selling into another country, they're selling worldwide. So the business owner and their accounting professional needs to understand sales tax in their own country, in the next country, and around the world, or they can't support them well. So that's a major area that needs to be focused on. Certainly the payment gateways.
Yeah. Stark contrast to brick and mortar, right? Like,
yeah, exactly. They're in one place. Now it gets very complex. Certainly the payment systems that we have, PayPal and Stripe and Square and Authorize.net, and you've got to understand, how do I get all that right information and how does that correlate with what I'm getting from their e-commerce platform? Inventory is another one, multi-currency selling, and then of course the one we're going to look at here on the screen. So what we've got on the screen is a detailed report out of Amazon of all the sales. Looks cool, right? No, actually it isn't. So the reality is when the deposit goes in the bank, you know, you're getting 82,000 in the bank, but that doesn't really correlate to what's happened. And you might have hundreds or thousands of line items of sales And you have to figure out, how am I going to get that information? Am I just going to try and do it by summary, which again, isn't going to give them that detailed information they need? Or am I going to sit here and try and work through that entire sheet to try and categorize everything the way it should? And, even if you were to do that, you're going to be missing some really key information, which we'll talk about on a couple of other slides. Yeah, so let's look at this one. This is a Shopify example. In this one, you see the amount of money that went in the bank was $15,000. And the number one mistake that I see business owners and some accounting professionals doing is they will simply book that $15,000 to sales, less a sales tax. So here in Canada, that might be the 5% GST. So if they did that, they would only be claiming about $780 in sales tax. But let's look at the other side, which is the details of what actually netted to that $15,000. The sales were $24,000. Plus they also had another $3,500 in sales with shipping income. They collected $3,700 in sales tax. So let's stop there for a second. If you had filed it based on the $15,000 and only said you collected $780, and your client gets a sales tax audit, you can be assured they want their $3,700. So it's key that we are providing accurate information around sales tax, because, nobody likes a deep sales tax audit. They're not fun. And then you also see we've got some expenses there. Okay, you wouldn't know about that. You wouldn't know about the pending payments, which are sales that haven't been paid yet. But all of that nets to the 15,000. And that information is really key. I want to show you an even more exaggerated one. Let's look at the next one, which is an Amazon example. Amazon's so much fun. So here you can see 82,000 went in the bank. Think about that. Okay, if I took that 82,000, booked it to sales, and took 5% sales tax, what am I doing there? No, the sales are 135,000. Shipping income, taxes. And what becomes really key is what I spoke about earlier, is you as an accounting professional being able to provide information in a way that's going to help the business succeed. And without that detail, they actually don't know how they're doing. And one key thing, I see some accounting professionals who are on the path to getting good at sales tax. They will pull the Amazon sales summary report, and they might just do a journal entry in the books. And they're feeling okay about that because they've broken all of that down. But what I'll tell you is there's a whole pile of information that's missing from that summary. And the biggest one are those Amazon reserves. So in this example, we see 45,000. So for those of you that might not be experienced with that, what Amazon does is for every sale that happens, they keep a percentage back. They hold it back for things like refunds or disputes. So they're always holding back a percentage of the money that should be paid out. And each time they do a payout, they're releasing some of the reserve and they're taking a new reserve. That 45,000 is an accounts receivable and belongs on the balance sheet as a receivable. And depending on the size of your client, that could be a big number. And that would be left out completely if you were just working from that summary. And this, I have to say this is where A2X helps us. We don't have to worry about it. It pulls all that information where the reporting in Amazon does not.
I didn't set that up to segue into A2X, but
no, I had to, because it's how we solve this problem.
Yeah, which is amazing. But you had talked about it, right? Like we're zooming in on one part of the complex nature of e-commerce businesses, and you had talked about a few other, sales tax, and I know that you have a list of 6. Do you mind just touching on the other 4 really quickly, and then we can move on to the next slide?
Well, sure. I kind of touched on them in the beginning. It's sales tax and understanding all the complexities. It's all the payment gateways and understanding how do I get the information from those gateways. It's certainly about inventory control, because a large percentage of e-com is a physical product. So now as an accounting professional, you have to have experience in inventory management, control, and valuation. That's just part of e-commerce. And definitely when you get into multi-currency and selling internationally and purchasing internationally, all of that will create additional complexities. And definitely trying to get the sales data. How do I get it? And all the platforms, I hate to say this, but none of them were designed with accounting in mind. They don't care about us. They don't give us the reports we need. So in a lot of them, you're trying to piece together and you're trying to pull information from here and you're trying to get this report to get accurate information for your clients. And all of those will make it much more complex.
Totally, which is an incredible segue. And thank you for the recap there on the top 6. But with complexity comes greater need for process, documentation, and standardization, which is the topic of today's webinar. Because the reality of the situation, right, is like you can go through all of that complexity and to a certain extent fly by the seat of your pants and tackle challenges as they come. Or there's the alternative route where you can spend a lot of time at the front end to set up your practice and your clients for long-term success, to try to manage through that complexity and actually, like, obviously it'll never be simple because it's not, but simplify the process as much as possible so that you're having more effective client relationships, satisfied clients, and well-retained clients. So there's obviously a ton that we could talk about from a process documentation and a workflow, checklist perspective, but we're, as mentioned, going to hone in on onboarding. A2X, that said, is working on tackling each piece of this pie over time. So this is the webinar on onboarding. So look out for future webinars that are going to talk about different areas of the customer journey. Okay, cool. So before we jump into the actual onboarding, we talked a little bit about the benefits of documenting your onboarding process, but I'll let Teresa and Jenny provide some additional context in terms of why this is so important and why most practices should likely invest in this area, because ultimately that's what leading practices are doing to differentiate themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to say onboarding is very near and dear to my heart, probably because we did a really bad job of it in the beginning. You learn by your mistakes, right? And you start building systems, because one of the areas we really struggled is that first one you have on the slide is expectations. When we didn't have a clear process, we were constantly in conflict with our clients. They thought one thing, we thought another. We didn't have a clear system. So by putting in systems, we now can have happier clients. And I always think back of, I went to a webinar at a conference and Juliet Aurora was speaking from AIS Solutions about customers. And she talked about having what she called this goodwill bucket. And she said, when you start the sales process, you might have this little bit of goodwill from there, but your client is also nervous. They hope they've made the right decision. They don't know if they've made the right decision. So the goal of onboarding is to fill up that goodwill bucket really quickly and having clear systems and processes that make them feel confident, like, okay, I'm working with a company that's got their act together. All of that's going to help fill that goodwill bucket and make them happier. And then hopefully you don't lose clients due to churn, because they do come to you nervous that they've made the right choice. Like, that's just part of it. So if you can't get them feeling really good and get them falling in love with the way you work with your clients, they're the ones that are going to leave really quickly, right? Because you didn't succeed in doing that. And let's face it, sooner or later, we're all going to make a mistake. But if that goodwill bucket is full and you make a mistake, you're not going to lose your client. But if that bucket's close to empty, you're probably going to lose the client. So there's some real advantages of being able to have a process that makes them feel welcome, makes them feel confident, lets them know that we are the right people to take care of what they need. And then when we make a mistake, they still love us. I think that's important, right?
I love that that story or that analogy, because in marketing, I'm not sure if you've ever seen car advertisements, like the car commercials on TV, and those car commercials aren't put in place to get new buyers. They're actually put in place to help people that recently made a purchasing decision justify the purchase that they made, that it was the right car. And effectively, what we're saying with the onboarding process is the onboarding process justifies the actual initial sale, like, oh, I did make the right decision. This is the right practice for me. And it sets up for long-term success in terms of continuing service. Jenny, anything else that you wanted to add there?
Yeah, I've been just soaking in all of this information, just like bobbing my head, like, yes, yes. So sorry, guys, for being quiet. I've been in the chat, just being chatty. But yeah, I would say, when it comes to like any client, but most specifically the e-commerce clients, because of the complexity, having that communication piece and setting those expectations, that is so important. And that's right from your discovery call, your prospecting, whether you're signing the engagement at that point and then moving on, having those regular milestones and touch points are important. And the other thing we learned, very similar, Teresa, is through mass amounts of mistakes. So to avoid, eating mud again, you write out your workflows. We're big users of a platform called Carbon, obviously, but we write it out so that it doesn't happen again. And that most important thing that we found during this particular stage, onboarding, is, there's even the business owner doesn't know their business model 100% and the tech stack behind it. And that's really scary. And part of our role is like, we have gone in deep and we've found more scope creep because the business owners themselves didn't know how to articulate their systems. So we actually had to like map it out and explain it and find out why HST was going to the shipping account because eCoast can't handle sales tax. So yeah, a lot of it is expectations, learning, and keeping that communication open as much as possible.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. Okay, cool. So that's the perfect segue. We talked about why e-commerce is complex, why it presents an opportunity for accounting and bookkeeping practices to be the superheroes for this particular niche. We talked about the importance of onboarding to try to manage through that complexity, but also to provide an incredible client experience that helps improve retention, that helps improve satisfaction. Now let's dive into the weeds a little bit. So as I mentioned earlier in the conversation, we've all collaborated on this wonderful piece called the Essential Onboarding Checklist for e-commerce clients. It's available as a PDF document, but also as a customizable Google Sheet that you can use at your practice. You might already have an onboarding process in place, which is great. So what I would say then is use this as inspiration. Maybe there are a few tasks and items that you want to pull into yours. And if you don't have an onboarding process in place, you could use this as a starting point and then optimize it to fit the needs of your practice and your clients. For the remainder of the webinar, what we're going to do is we're actually going to jump in to two areas of this checklist that Jenny and Teresa are going to walk us through. What's even cooler about this checklist, though, is it comes with a ton of bonus assets. So, and these bonus assets are going to be incredibly beneficial to practices that are supporting e-commerce clients. So bonus number one, welcome email sequence topic ideas. Bonus number two, questions that you can ask during the onboarding process. Questions number three, bonus number three, questions for the first meeting. Bonus number four, required client logins. Obviously, Jenny talked about tech stack. This is incredibly important. A little bit more challenging if they don't know what they're actually using yet. Bonus number five, A2X setup workflows. So if you are using A2X to manage some of the automation around organizing those transactions coming from Amazon and Shopify, then Teresa has provided us with her step-by-step instructions on how to set up A2X, implementation checklist, onboarding review questions, and then sample chart of accounts for Amazon and Shopify. So said another way, this is a beast of a document and a resource, which is why we want to spend the rest of the actual webinar going through it to help you get the most value out of it. Okay, so I'm going to stop talking pretty soon. I just wanted to cover one thing really quickly, and it is how to use the checklist. The checklist is broken down into 4 key sections. There's going to be pre-onboarding, onboarding, post-onboarding, and the bonus section that I just talked about. In today's webinar, we're going to go over pre-onboarding and onboarding, and then that should give you an idea of how to apply that to the post-onboarding experience and the rest. Highly recommend downloading or making a copy of the worksheet, and then just going ahead and optimizing it for the needs of your practice. That means task assignments, descriptions of tasks, so on and so forth. So without further ado, I'm going to dive in. I'm going to pass the mic over to Jenny, who's actually going to provide the deep dive into the pre-onboarding process.
Thank you. Yes, this one is it is so important. It's, as accounting professionals, we tend to like want to jump right in and start fixing stuff and reconciling and moving things around. But there's a lot of softer skills and approaches that need to take place. I love that, Teresa and Juliet, filling up that goodwill bucket. This is that stage, right? So one, we did talk about that, is setting the expectation. So documenting as much as possible, because even in your own firm, as you have employees come and go, it's a natural thing, right? Or what if something happens to you? It's really important to have the documentation on how different checkpoints need to happen with tech stacks, because garbage in, garbage out, sometimes you still need to do a check on how data is happening, or check in with the client to make sure, oh, does that inventory make sense in Shopify, or is BigCommerce acting the way it should be with that bump up sale? Whatever the case is, really documenting all those touch points. And it seems awful, but do it as you're onboarding. Write it out and then have it as a breathing document for all of your team to update. I can't stress enough about setting expectations. I know, Jeff, you kind of giggled when we were doing our pre-webinar chat, but with my clients, when we onboard them, yes, we're going to fix their problems, but it's going to be, at some points, they're not going to like me in the very beginning. They're going to love me by the time we're done, but not going to like me because things I'm going to bring to their attention that are painful and hurtful, like a system that isn't behaving the way it's supposed to be, or there's a better way of doing something and they should be using a different type of workflow. So setting those expectations up front, that, like for us, like Teresa and I both love the Dragon methodology. We look for growth-minded organizations. So in order to have growth-minded organizations, there needs to be change. So setting that expectation that if we don't like how something's acting, we're going to change it. And if they're very stuck in that old way, maybe it's not a good fit. So being very true to that, always bump up your value, go that little extra mile. That's that goodwill bucket. I'm going to use that. That's awesome. But, always, showing how much you care, the authenticity, the human side is really important this stage, because they are nervous, right? Especially if your engagements are, and they should be, worth your value. Working with the team, having the team environment. I think the biggest mistake I did was trying to be everyone to everything to everyone. Involving your team, it gives them a chance for them to learn too. And it also helps out that, hey, if you're going to a conference, or maybe you're on a webinar with the amazing people of A2X and Teresa Slack, that they can handle it. Remind them of those bigger obstacles, like during the discovery call that you have with them, what were the biggest pain points they articulated? Okay. Was it like not knowing where their business is at? Was it being in default with, the government agencies, whether it's the IRS or Canada Revenue Agency, whatever the case is? Remind them that, hey, we are solving this. This hard work that you're doing is going to solve this. And that will keep them centric on that. And then obviously I'm a big person on when it comes to scope and scope creep and managing and all this good stuff. You want to make sure you're picking technology that does that, having your contract in place. Obviously, I'm a big fan of Ignition, a longtime user, now working for them. But you always want to go back to that as well. Is what you're doing in scope? And oftentimes we're changing scope a lot because we know we are, because we've articulated it in our engagement and we're monitoring it and documenting it as we're going through. And it's a healthy relationship. If you want a little bit of help with that, with scope creep, we take a goal setting initiative, like, congratulations, you've now hit a new metric. And we align scope change with that. We grow with them. So those are some of my hints for the pre-onboarding process. Hopefully I didn't bore anybody, but I'm very passionate about this stage.
Awesome. Teresa, anything you want to add before we jump to the next stage?
Yeah, the one thing I want to mention, and Jenny, you touched on it, is with e-commerce clients, you're going to see a lot of scope change. That's fairly normal. The
So
industry in and of itself, they're like, oh, cool, I'm going to start selling on Shopify too. Oh, wait a minute. I think I'm going to set up a website. Oh, you know what? What's this Klarna app? Oh, let's use Sezzle. and of course, they don't think to tell you. You're just all of a sudden going, wait a minute, what's this?
Right?
Contacting them and they're going, oh yeah, I set up this new thing. And it's like, okay, I'm so excited for you. You're growing. We need to look at your contract. And,
Yeah.
shameless plug here, we use Ignition as well. And it makes it a lot easier to, I can take their current contract and duplicate it and just make some tweaks to it. And it does make it a lot easier when you're in this industry where things are changing with them quite often.
So true. I got a short little personal story. I'll make it super quick, Jeff. Like talking about that scope creep, and Teresa and I had a good giggle about this with one of my Shopify clients. They integrated Coinbase perfectly fine, but it's Bitcoin. And all of a sudden, our workflows went from here to massive. And the way our engagement is set out, it's like, okay, you have Stripe and you have PayPal. If you integrate Coinbase, our scope's changing and it's going to change a lot. Or you can deactivate it. Within 2 hours, he had that thing deactivated.
Jenny, we've done the same. We've done the exact same. It's like, congratulations, but this is what's going to happen. It's like, oh, maybe I don't need multi-currency Sezzle. I don't need the US and the Canada and maybe we'll just go with okay.
If it's going to make your money, I'm all for it. But if it's
Absolutely.
like to dabble and experiment, no, that's an expensive experiment.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Speaking of making money though, e-commerce is one of the only industries that I've seen companies go from a few $100,000 in revenue to tens of millions, literally overnight. Yeah. So when you think about scope creep from that perspective, right? Like it's going, Teresa, I think you said e-commerce accounting is scope creep, like just the nature, it's just the nature of the beast in this area. But really important to set those expectations at the beginning. So awesome. Thanks so much, Jenny, for going over that. Now we're going to jump into a pretty meaty section, which is going to be the actual onboarding process. Fair warning, this is going to be 6 slides with a lot of touch points on the actual checklist. What's going to happen here is Teresa is going to glaze over the ones that don't necessarily need a lot of context, but going to dive into the ones that tend to be a little bit more important, especially in the context of e-commerce. So don't be overwhelmed when you see all this information. This is effectively, these are just going to be images pulled from the actual checklist itself. But this is kind of like a good supporting asset to the checklist when you start to implement it within your practice. So without further ado, Teresa, on to you.
All right. So at this point, we can all say, congratulations, we have a signed agreement with our brand new client. Jenny's done her thing, we've got them signed and they're super, super excited. So this checklist takes you through what you want to do from the minute you now have a signed agreement. What do we do? And I will say the nice thing is you're going to be able to customize this. Some of the things you see in here, you won't need, because the way it's been designed is if you're using, for example, Ignition in your processes like this, you might not need some of these steps, but we also know not everybody is using that. So we've included steps if you're doing things a little bit more manually, and you'll just be able to customize and take out the ones you don't need. So we just tried to make it work for everyone, and then you make it your own. So the first thing, what do we want to do? We want to welcome them. Now, one of the great ways you can do that is have a new client onboarding email sequence set up that is going to drip feed them some information over the first few weeks or over the first month. And I'm going to tell you a little story here. I created an onboarding brochure and I put all this super important information in it, and it was beautiful. It was gorgeous. I was so proud of it. It was probably about 20 pages long. And I would send that to my client. And one of two things happened. They either didn't read it at all, or they read it and got completely overwhelmed. I had one client who had just signed their agreement. This was a few years ago, who emailed me back and said, you know what? We've decided not to work with you. It feels like too much work. On that day, I stopped using my onboarding brochure and use an email sequence instead, because it drip feeds them. They don't start feeling overwhelmed. And that's what happened. I overwhelmed them with too much at once. So using a sequence of emails that you can start for all of your clients really can help to build that relationship without completely overwhelming them. And so you want to start with that. You want to get them set up to do that. You want to get them set up in your whatever CRM you're using, and you want to get that email flow going. Okay. Then you have some internal work to do. You know, we've got an agreement. Now we've got to set some things up. You want to make sure the team knows that you've got a new person. Depends how your firm is. If you're a larger firm, you might have onboarding specialists, you might have bookkeepers, you might have accountants. It just depends on what you're doing. You want to make sure you've got the right team in place that's going to take care of them. For us, we have an onboarding specialist and a bookkeeper that works with our clients. And if you're not doing the email sequence, at the very least, you want to make sure you are sending a welcome email. It's okay if you don't have your sequence going. We get it. There's so much to do as a business owner. At the very least, to make sure they are getting that one email that sets out what's going to happen next. Because believe me, as soon as they've signed that agreement, they want to know what's happening now. So you want to make sure that happens, and you want to plan and book that first onboarding meeting with them. You want to get everything set up, get your files done, you know, get your structures organized. Now we're lucky. We're members of Pure Bookkeeping, and they actually provide us with a beautiful structure. So every single client's file has the same folders, has the same organization, and that really creates efficiency. You're not trying to look through and, okay, where would that one be? Everything's the same, makes it easy to work with. And then you have a couple of options. One is to send your client a questionnaire to have them fill in all the information. Now, we know in our industry, we have to gather a lot of information from our clients, right? And with e-commerce, there's even more information that we need. So you can either send them a questionnaire and have them fill that out, or you could do that during your first onboarding meeting. We kind of do a bit of both. And the reason we don't just send them a questionnaire is we find that, one, they don't really provide enough information. With a conversation, you can say, well, hold on a minute, and you can dig deeper, because you want to make sure you've got the scope right. You don't want to find out at this point that, oh, wait a minute, you didn't say you had an Amazon account as well as shop. You don't want that. So having a conversation, and also that's your opportunity. You're now continuing to build that relationship. So I would just be careful about how much you automate the onboarding process. We have amazing apps, tools, and systems. You could pretty much automate the entire process. But if you do that, where's your opportunity to build that relationship? So you want to have a real balance of automation and personal touch to make sure you're being efficient, but you're creating those opportunities for you to build that relationship and make them feel welcome. If they never talk to you because all they get is a questionnaire and another questionnaire, and then they're told to do this and they get another email and they don't see you, you're not going to have filled that goodwill bucket. So be careful with how much automation you use. Okay. And then let's just go to the next page, because there's lots.
That's why they're here. Don't worry, Teresa.
Yeah. Now, again, this next item you're seeing here is send that first invoice. Now, depending on what you're using, my hope is that you're already been paid. So we use Ignition in our firm, and when they sign the agreement, they have to enter their payment method. They have to make that first payment. And I'm really happy that they can choose between a credit card or a direct debit. Now you're not having to have a second process where you remember to go in and create that. And that's actually what used to happen to me before I used Ignition. I would send them the agreement and they'd sign it and I'd get going. And then a month later realize, oh, shoot, I didn't create that recurring invoice that's going to bill them. So, you know, where possible, you want to make it easy, and that you're not going to forget things like that, like I did. And you want to, I recommend you get paid in advance. We bill our clients at the beginning of every month for that month's work, rather than issuing an invoice after the work is done. You know, as accounting professionals, we are not their bank. We should not be funding them. We need to be paid, and they need to respect the work that we are doing. and be prepared to do that. And if you have a potential client who is absolutely against that, they're probably not a good fit. You probably don't want to work with them, because that's a big red flag that they don't value what you're doing and that they don't trust you. You know, if they're not willing to pay in advance, then it's a trust issue. So just be careful of that. You want to make sure you get them set up in your practice management system. So for us, we're using an amazing one called Pure Workflow. It's through Pure Bookkeeping. It's beautiful. It's designed specifically for bookkeepers, and it makes our life so much easier. But whatever you're using, get them in there, make sure everything's set up and all the processes and your checklists. We have all of our onboarding checklists, and then whatever systems, whatever services they bought from us, we then attach all the checklists for that work as well. And with Pure Bookkeeping, they actually give us those. Now we've customized them because e-commerce is a little bit different, but we're not having to start from scratch. Okay. How's our time? I don't want to go too deep. Let's skip some things. And then, you know, in your next step 4, now we're doing some more internal processes. You're going to go over the questionnaire that they've sent, if you've sent them one. You're going to make sure you're constantly talking about deadlines and setting those expectations and doing preliminary software setups and making sure that you're prepared for that first meeting. Okay. Do you want to go to the next slide?
I'm on. There we go.
Thanks. Thanks. Now you've done all that pre-work. Now you're ready to meet with the client. And this first meeting is all about building a relationship, getting to know each other, and setting expectations. So if you've got an onboarding specialist or an onboarding specialist and a bookkeeper, or however your team is organized, it's great if they can be there, because it's a nice handoff. In our firm, I do all the sales for our firm, and then I pass them off to our onboarding specialist and their bookkeeper. So I'm there. And because right now they only know me, it is a great handoff. Make sure everybody knows each other and set those expectations of what are we going to do today? What are our goals? What are we trying to get done today? What are the timelines we're going to do it in? And I think it's really important that you always review the agreement with them, talk about scope creep, talk about the commitments that they've made and that you're making to them. You want to set the stage for a professional, respectful relationship between both parties. And that comes from being really clear and making sure they understand, this is what we're going to do for you. Anything outside of that, this is how we're going to handle that. Then they're prepared for it. You always want to check too. This is something we always do, is get them to talk about how they're feeling right now, because they're probably pretty stressed and they've got some big problems that are kind of weighing on them and keeping them up at night. So I like to ask that, because then we know these are the things that are going to create wins for them. And if there's maybe a few little wins that we can do quickly for them, we try and do those, because that's going to create that trust. It's going to create that goodwill that helps them see that. So checking in with them and seeing how they're feeling is really important. Okay.
I was
And
just going
then-
to say, Teresa,
Yeah.
and that's the power of a checklist, right? Like that's one that, like if you just leave it as is, you're probably going to do it on some clients, probably going to forget it on others. But when you actually document it, you know to do this with every client.
Yeah.
It might seem pretty high level, but it's actually incredibly valuable.
It's incredibly valuable and super helpful. Yeah, for sure. You want to start getting your login details from clients. I don't put any of that in a questionnaire because that's confidential information. All of that is only ever done over Zoom, so that, you know, there's no login details passing through email. We don't want that. Okay. For e-commerce, I highly recommend that you get access to all of their e-commerce platforms and payment gateways. You need access to Shopify. You need access to Amazon, BigCommerce. Get your own logins. Make sure you can get the information you need. Because if you're counting on your client to send you reports, you're going to fail. And they might send you one report and you start using that, and now you're stuck because it didn't work. Get your logins. And Shopify makes that really easy. You can set up a Shopify partner account. There's no cost to it. And then you send your clients what's called a collaborator access. and you can now access their store. The nice thing about that is it doesn't count towards their users. And for clients on the low end on Shopify, they can only have a couple of users. So adding you as another user can be a problem. So get yourself a partner account. It's beautiful too when you have a team, because you invite your team to it. You can then choose which clients your team has access to, and it's just so much easier. Okay. Going over your due dates, what are we going to do? Who's going to do what when? All of that is super important and covered. And I always end my meetings with next steps and kind of a recap. Okay, so Jenny, you're going to go away and do A, B, and C. And I'm going to go away and I'm going to do A, B, and C. And we're going to book another meeting to catch up. And that's one thing we do during onboarding. We ask our clients for a weekly meeting. We meet with them every week as we're getting going, and a whole pile of reasons. Keeps things moving. Let's face it, most of our clients come to us with a cleanup. It is extremely rare that they come with up-to-date books and we're just taking it over. So we want to have those opportunities to keep them moving forward. That's what we choose to do. You don't have to do that. That's just what we choose to do. Okay, let's go to the next one. Okay, now we're into more detailed setup, and I'm not going to read through this because I want to make sure that we have time for questions, that we have time to chat at the end of this. But this is the in-depth steps: getting access to their government authorities, setting up their apps for them, making sure you've introduced yourself to their accountant. If you're a bookkeeper and you're going to be working closely with them, you want to build that relationship. And every meeting always ends with, what am I going to do and what are you going to do? Okay.
I was just going to say, Teresa, as the webinar is being recorded, even if we go a little bit longer than the recording afterwards.
Starting to feel stressed.
That's good. Because
remove the
grab
stress.
a sleeping bag, folks. We're staying.
That's it. We're not going anywhere. Yeah, I want to be mindful of everybody's time, and they can certainly go and read all of this. But what's amazing is this was created by me in conjunction with Pure Bookkeeping. I took theirs and then beefed it up tenfold and made it into so much more. And that has actually been incorporated into the Pure system. So anybody who is involved with them, they actually get all of this kind of material as well. And I'm really happy that they were willing to share this information with all of you, so that you can take this away and start building amazing relationships with your clients, because that's really what it's all about.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they're a great organization.
Yeah, they really are. Okay, so these steps are getting a little bit more in detail. When we meet with them again, I always like to do a bookkeeping do's and don'ts. What is a business expense? What isn't? Mixing business and personal, how to manage receipts, and what do we need in the way of receipts, and all that kind of stuff. And the one other thing I want to mention is that a diagnostic review during the sales process is highly recommended. So before you even get to an agreement, you want to have a look at the client's books, if at all possible, because that can incredibly affect the scope. I can't tell you the number of times where we've discovered things, especially if it's an e-com business that had an accounting professional that really didn't have experience with e-com, and they may have been doing things incorrectly. And we may find that there's a cleanup that's needed to bring it into compliance and make sure their sales tax is correct and all that kind of important stuff. And if you don't do a diagnostic review in advance, part of this process here is to do what we call a health check. So if you've gone to agreement and now you're going to look at their accounting file, you want to make sure you do that health check. Take a look at what's in there, see if you've discovered anything, and bring that back to the client with a proposal on how you're going to fix it for them. So you may immediately have a second engagement with them to deal with those things that may not have been quite what you thought they were going to be in the books. So I think that's really key. Jenny, what's your take on diagnostic review and health checks? And
yeah, absolutely. Because, sometimes you're able to get access to the client books ahead of time, and that's great. But typically it's like, everyone always says, well, I'm perfect. My books are up to date. We'll see.
That never
So
happens.
yeah, no, like we went back in the DeLorean for one of our e-commerce clients back a full 12 months.
Yeah.
It's like, we're not like, we're going to have our continuous engagement going, like
Mhm.
obviously through Ignition. They're paying us for the
Yes.
monthly bookkeeping, but we
Mhm.
can't even start this month until we give you a quote and you accept it on the last 12 months, because Jenny ain't doing that for free.
Exactly. Absolutely. And
There has
I
been, sorry,
that
go ahead.
does happen. Go ahead. Go
I was
ahead.
going to say a lot of activity, both in the chat and the Q&A. Thank
okay.
you, everyone. I just love this. I'm like back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. A lot on logins and things like that. Can I just take a few
Yeah, let's do
moments?
it.
Just a quick few moments. So a lot of individuals using password keepers, things like that. I think one thing, and Teresa, feel free to jump in, when it comes to your e-commerce clients, they think very savvy, like, oh, I'll just give you my login information. And as Teresa said, I really want to stress on that. That's not adequate enough. You need your own, like, your own email address, your own user, and so does anybody else working on your team, because a lot of times these apps have 2F on them, right? So, it's, there's some sort of timing requirement, and it's very difficult if you're going to work with your client. Okay, what's that code? And it's not compliant either.
No.
So really stress to get that, your own email address to that.
Absolutely, 100%. And
Yeah.
then manage all of that through a good password manager, or we actually go the next step. We use a system called Practice Protect within our
Perfect.
firm. So all of our team, they only know one login. They log into their Practice Protect portal, and in the background, we have created all their icons that has all their accesses and logins.
There you go.
It's much more secure, but yeah, you can't function with the world of two-factor using their login. It's just not going to work. You're going to drive yourself crazy.
Like, I think I authenticated myself. I'm like, I'm a real human, like 10 times before 9 o'clock this morning. I'm like, it's like, and the other thing too, that I would stress is, on the reporting side, when it comes to your e-commerce sites, that's great. But when it comes to cash, like virtual cash, like PayPal, Stripe, whatever else there's out there, the bank itself, try as much as possible to get read-only access. So yes, you're still getting the data, but you don't have virtual access to cash. Not that you would go and do something, but it's to protect you against that question if it ever came up.
Yeah,
that would be my other
100%.
advice.
Absolutely, Jenny. Wherever possible, it's just smart to not have that worry that $4,000 came out and they're calling you.
Yeah, like, oh, yeah.
You don't even want that to ever be a thought.
Yeah, no, it's just not cool. So as much as possible, read only for cash, virtual cash, and then access, like legitimate your account access, because you get to change the passwords and all that good stuff.
Yes, exactly.
Totally agree. Cool. So Teresa, want me to move to the last checklist slide?
Sure. So that section 9 is about preparing your procedures and your processes. So that's here and on the next screen. So for each of your clients, especially with e-com, because they're all a little bit different, you have to look at what processes do I need? What checklists do I need for this client? Do I need the Amazon checklist? Do I need the Shopify checklist? Do I need a Sezzle checklist and how to manage that? So you want to review the client and determine what checklists, what processes, what procedures do they need, so that you can tie them into your practice management system and all the right things are there for your team to do their work. And then you also want to look at, is there anything we need to do for the client? So depending on your engagement, they might be doing certain things and you want to make sure they know how to do it properly. So let's say, for example, you have an engagement where their job is to enter their expenses and their bills and their bill payments. You want to make sure they know how to do that properly. Do they have the processes so they're doing it correctly? Because it's not helpful if they're doing it and it's all wrong and you're fixing it. So this section is really about that. And if there's any training you need to do for the client, you want to plan that out as well. Do I need to show them how to use a Dext or a HubDoc or, any of those things, so that they are trained to do the work properly, which is going to make your life a lot easier. And then step 10 is the handover. Depending on the size of your firm, you might have done the sales, the onboarding, and the work, but You might have, like in my firm, I do the sales, somebody else does onboarding, and then there's a bookkeeper. Now, we always do our best to have the bookkeeper involved through the entire onboarding process, but there may be handoffs needed. And if that's the case, you want to make sure the person that's receiving this work understands the agreement, understands the client. So having a meeting with them, so that handoff is beautiful and smooth, and our client doesn't have any hiccups through that process. And then, of course, there's a whole bunch on post onboarding, but we're not going to talk about that today.
Jenny and Teresa, that was great. Super in depth. I know that there's a lot here, but really important, especially the points that you both focused on, I think provide a ton of context and a ton of helpful tips and tricks on how to get the most out of this checklist within your practice. We're getting a few questions about where the checklist is going to be coming from. If you haven't already received it via email, we will send it in a follow-up email with the on-demand webinar. It is available in a PDF format. What you saw is kind of what the PDF format is going to look like, as well as a customizable Google Sheet. So a sheet that you could just copy, paste, and then edit it to fit the needs of your practice. And then all of the bonus assets that I talked about a little bit earlier in the session, they're all included in that customizable Google Sheet. So again, a really, really meaty, super valuable resource that we really appreciate Teresa and Pure Bookkeeping and Jenny and the Englishing team bringing that to light, bringing it forward, and sharing it with all of you who are joining us today. Cool. So, best practices when implementing processes. Teresa, you talked about the onboarding guide that you had created and sent over to your clients, and they felt a little bit overwhelmed, and because of that, weren't super keen to continue the relationship with your practice. That probably can happen internally as well when you're putting forward these like huge checklists and processes. There's going to be time, attention, and a few other things that need to be taken into account when trying to implement this internally. I'm going to go through them really quickly at a high level, but I'd love if there's anything that speaks to either you, Teresa, or Jenny, from your real world experiences to jump in and provide some additional context. But some of the best practices that we have here, first and foremost, get the team involved early and often, make them feel as though they are part of the process. Scaling and size dictate level of detail. Less scale equals less detail. More scale equals more detail. Eliminate ambiguity wherever possible. So bake in clear ownership with clean handoffs. If you want nothing done, then assign it to 2 people is the name of the game. Be patient. So good habits can take months to form. So stay the course to extract the fruits of your labor. That is especially true with implementing processes and checklists. Lead by example. So show, encourage, and remind team members to always be following and optimizing your process. And that, to a high level, just means kind of eating your own dog food and kind of getting into the weeds and following the process step by step, making everyone see that we're doing so as a team and as a unit. Next up is optimize, optimize, and optimize. These processes are living, breathing documents. I don't know what your cadence of review looks like, but I would recommend at least once a quarter to come back to it and to review and then to optimize the processes or the steps that could be improved. What is your cadence, generally speaking, on the optimization front?
We are constantly reviewing and updating. Like, it just never ends for us, and we're always tweaking it. And I love it when a new team member comes in, because they have no background and they ask great questions. And to me, every one of those questions means a tweak, because it means it's missing and it's not been covered in a way that somebody is going to understand it. So we are constantly looking at it. We are constantly updating them.
Yeah. Totally. I would say anytime you feel pain, and that sounds weird, but whether it's pain from feedback from your clients and their experience, or your experience, your team members, when there's friction or pain, that means there's a problem. So you need to revisit it, figure it out, and document it. And it's not a person or a problem. It's just things like this happen. And so being very human and open without name blaming and just
Mhm.
being very clear, whenever there's friction or pain, that means your workflows are acting up, go back.
But that's a really good segue into the last one, right? Friction or pain or laborious, time-consuming tasks.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Good opportunity to see if technology can be leveraged to
Yeah.
automate those processes. So I think pain is like, okay, maybe it's a process issue, but maybe it's also a technology issue
Yep.
and can take you down one of two different paths. Anything that you wanted to add on to here before we jump into the Q&A section?
No, I think you covered it.
Brilliant. Okay, great. So we're very close to the end. Teresa, you had talked about Financially, you had talked about Academy, you had also talked about pure bookkeeping. Without these things, this document wouldn't have been able to come to life. Do you mind just talking a little bit about what these programs are and how folks that are joining the webinar could extract value from them?
Sure, absolutely. So the first one you see is our brand new training academy for accounting professionals. Connie and I started this academy last October, and it came out of us doing lots of one-on-ones with accounting professionals, just like everyone who's here, trying to help them through these complexities that they're experiencing. But what happened is our calendars got so full, we couldn't help people. So we decided we needed a way to help more people all at one time. So in October, we launched the Academy. And what we do is every month we do live training on various aspects of e-commerce accounting, from how to manage the platforms to payment gateways. We did sales tax. This month, we covered an intro to inventory management and control. Next month, we're going deep on inventory for e-commerce. So every month we provide training, and people can join if e-commerce is their thing and they want to get really good at it and have the ability to build a really great, profitable business in this space. This can help them do it. And then, of course, I couldn't have done it without partnership with Pure Bookkeeping, who have had a major impact on our firm and have helped us systemize and streamline our processes. And that's why I get to work with them and help them make that onboarding program awesome. And I'm currently working on a value price module for them as well. So it's anybody that wants to build a successful bookkeeping firm. Pure Bookkeeping is really the way to do it. It's going to give them the tools, the strategies, the support that they need to go from overwhelmed and failing to successful. If we had more time, I'd tell you our story of failure, but maybe another time.
What's great is I've seen a few folks in the chat talk about both and say how valuable it's been for their practices. So a lot of good social proof there as well, which is fantastic.
Great.
Thanks so much, Teresa. And then Jenny, I'll just let you touched on Ignition a little bit, but I'll let you jump in to give people some context on some additional resources that are available.
Sure, absolutely. Sorry, I've been so busy with the Q&A, and Jamie Schulman, I saw you trying to fool me on the questions. Yeah, so now back to business. So yes, Ignition, really what we are is if you were to think about Shopify, we are the Shopify of engagement. So we make it super simple. We are the world's first engagement platform that makes it super simple for you to articulate your value through a fun and innovative engagement. And yes, it is fun. Lots of great stuff. Like I said, I've been using it for 2016, and we have not been sleeping during COVID. We have done a ton of product enhancements. So if you want to know a little bit more about us, check us out. And for many people who have asked in the chat, is Practice Ignition the same as Ignition? Yes, we have rebranded recently. We are now simply called Ignition, but we are the same great team, the same amazing product. And we are going to be going to a lot of events, both in Canada and the US, myself included. So check us out, look for us, come by, say hi, get a hug if you want one.
Fantastic.
That's awesome.
Last but not least, A2X. So earlier on in the webinar, Teresa showed one of the complexities associated with e-commerce accounting, those sales reports with really messy data that you could just record as sales. A2X helps you automatically categorize all of those transactions and take away the pain of, of that process. I'm not going to go into it that much more. If you want to learn more about our partner program, I'm going to send a follow-up email with a few links, as well as free trials. And we will be launching the certification course soon. So if you're not yet an A2X customer, it gives you an opportunity to jump in and get an idea of how A2X can help you in your e-commerce clients. Cool. So now, the end of the webinar, the Q&A section. Jenny has been doing a fantastic job moderating that, which is great because it saves us some time on the back end. But there were a few questions that would probably be great to surface to Teresa and Jenny and let everyone benefit from the answers. The first one is, can you define what the onboarding specialist role looks like? Which I think is a great question.
Mm-hmm. Sure. It says,
so Teresa, do you want to jump in first?
Sure, but I see it says Jenny Moore is going to answer this live. So
oh, I'm having fun. It's Teresa. I've just been like trying to keep ahead of all of this. It's been so great. It's like social media gone wild. No, Teresa, that's yours.
Beautiful.
You catch the ball.
Sure.
Go.
Okay. So our onboarding specialist, it's a high level job, because especially with e-commerce, because they have to understand the complexities. Part of their job is that health checking the file, making sure there's no issues. And it really is about going through that whole checklist, all the things you've seen today. So it's the education, it's the processes, it's the procedures, it's the meetings with the clients, gathering all of the information, creating processes with the client where needed, and really helping them to become part of your company, helping them feel that they understand how they're going to work with you. They understand how you're going to help them. They understand what their responsibilities are and what yours are. So it's really about bringing them in. And once the onboarding process is complete, that's when the handoff happens and they go to, in our case, to a bookkeeper. So it really is that whole onboarding piece that you're going to get all the resources on.
Awesome.
Do you want to add anything to that? Did I miss something?
I think you nailed it.
Okay.
Yeah.
We had a question. Can you drop a link for the Academy? So Teresa did do that in the chat, but I will mention that all of the resources that we talked about during the webinar, they're going to be included in the follow-up email, including links to Academy and Pure Bookkeeping. Good segue into Pure Bookkeeping, because we do have a question here. How is Pure Bookkeeping different from Carbon or another practice management software? So Teresa, I'll let you
I'll take that one.
Yeah.
Pure Bookkeeping is not a practice management system. It is a bookkeeping business system. So it includes a whole section on sales and marketing for your business. It includes a whole section on processes, how to file a sales tax return, how to handle receivables, how to handle payables, everything to do with managing the business. It has a whole HR module. How do you hire bookkeepers? How do you train them? All of that. So Pure Bookkeeping is like a bookkeeping business in a box. Pure Workflow, however, is a practice management system that is designed to house all of your checklists, all of your to-dos, and manage the whole practice. So those are two different things. I hope that answers it. Did I miss anything?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, and it's a good segue to the question that Lucy had as well, is how is Ignition the same or different than Pure Workflow? And I would say that Ignition is the start. So that is like creating your proposal, letter of engagement, contract, whatever terminology we want to put on it. And what's really important is that you dice out your proposal in Ignition to match your workflows, whether you're using Zero Practice Manager, Intuit Practice Management, Carbon, or using Zapier to integrate with some of these other platforms as well. So it's like the prospecting part, the sales part, and it also manages the scope. And then you look for a workflow platform to manage the tasks and perhaps even email, depending on how some of them are handled. So I hope that helps.
Yeah.
Awesome.
That makes sense.
Next question. So does A2X also help with Uber Eats and Skip the Dishes? Not at the moment, but Naomi, happy to have a follow-up conversation to hear about the use case. I'm assuming that would be more for gig workers, but I will not make any assumptions before we chat. So we'll take that one offline. And then next question, should the onboarding specialist be an accountant or bookkeeper?
My opinion would be that depends on what your engagement is with them, right? In our case, we are a full service bookkeeping firm. So absolutely, we need our onboarding specialists to be an accountant or a bookkeeper because they're going through all of these processes and checking their platforms, and they need to be able to do that. If you were possibly a tax practice, I don't know that your onboarding specialist needs to be that. It just depends on what your engagement is. So I guess my answer is that depends.
Yeah, it does.
And
And some kudos to you, Teresa. We have some people that have recently joined the Academy and love it so far.
Oh, awesome. Oh, that's nice to hear.
Yay.
We're glad to have you.
Can I grab this one question in the chat, or we still got people on here? There's a lot of people still hanging around. So either they've just, left Zoom going or they actually want to know more. Jerry's got a good question. So they use Xero, and of course HubDoc is complimentary if you're a Xero user. And the question is do you recommend HubDoc being a separate call with your client, or it being covered in the initial onboarding? And I'd love to take that if I can. Teresa spoke to this earlier, where that overload feeling, right? So what you want to do is, have those milestones. It's something I kind of peppered in earlier as well. So with your onboarding checklist, perhaps that's one of them, right? And so what you want to do is handle things in stages, because you're giving your customer a heck of a lot of homework. We call it homework. Literally, we do. And so we don't want them to get agitated. But yes, what I do within my firm, because we leverage HubDoc as well, is we have a separate call just to train them on HubDoc. And if it's a bigger team, how we're going to handle it. So right from downloading the app on their phone, having them take a picture of a coffee mug, sorry, it's blurry, coffee mug, and they see it in the portal. Or if they don't have time, we have like a YouTube video that gets still tons of hits, by the way, a YouTube video that we'll send to them. So I do recommend piecing that out along with every tech. Every tech should have a separate meeting and no longer than an hour, because they're going to get fried.
Yeah. And that's why you'll see in the checklist, there's like initial things, and then there's some more in the next one, and then there's some more in the next one, because you don't want to overwhelm them.
Awesome. Great. So it feels like we've gone through most of the Q&A. I think this is probably a good time to call it. I just want to say before we jump off, thank you so much to everyone for joining today's webinar. It's really great to have you here. Super engaged too, which was really awesome. And then B, Teresa, Jenny, wow. Thank you so much for providing your expertise, building this resource, and offering it to the community. Rising tides raise all ships, and you both obviously truly believe in that mantra. So thank you so very much on behalf of everyone that's joining, but also on behalf of A2X. This was a pleasure. Really great to work together.
Really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks for coming. It's so nice to see everyone.
Have a great day. Bye.